The galaxy was vast, peaceful, and full of life stretching across millions of stars. Different alien species coexisted in harmony, and at the center of it all stood the Zoren Empire, the dominant force that ruled over countless planets. With the largest fleet in the galaxy, their ships were powerful, their armies unstoppable, and their empire seemed untouchable. No one questioned their dominance, and the Zoren relished their position. As the undisputed rulers of the stars, in their arrogance, they looked down upon Earth, seeing it as nothing more than a backwater planet, insignificant and primitive to them. Humans were weak creatures with no place in the grand story of the galaxy. Earth had no advanced technology, no mighty armies, and no spacefaring fleets. It was barely a footnote in galactic history, a world so unimportant that the Zoren never even bothered to study it closely. But the truth was far different. On Earth, humanity had endured for centuries, shaped by hardship and survival. While the galaxy dismissed them as fragile beings, they had spent generations overcoming challenges, learning from their mistakes, and growing stronger with every passing era. Though they were not yet a spacefaring race, they were far from helpless. For the most part, humans were focused on their daily lives, building cities, studying the stars, and dreaming of what lay beyond their world. They had no idea that distant eyes were watching them, nor that some of those eyes were already planning their destruction. The galaxy's rulers had no reason to fear Earth, and for a time the universe remained undisturbed. But in the shadows of power, whispers began to spread. Rumors emerged about a species that was different, one that refused to surrender, one that could endure the impossible. To most, these were just stories, tales to amuse those who dared to question the status quo. The Zoren Empire, in particular, ignored such foolishness. Convinced that nothing could challenge their rule, they laughed at the idea that humanity could pose any kind of threat. Their fleet was unmatched, their military strategies flawless, and peace had reigned for so long that the balance of power seemed permanent. However, the Zoren Empire was about to make a mistake, one that would change the galaxy forever. A lone Zoren scout ship carrying only a handful of soldiers was sent on a routine mission to explore the farthest reaches of their domain. Their task was simple: survey a quiet, unremarkable planet known as Earth. No one expected the mission to be significant, let alone dangerous. It was supposed to be a formality, a simple confirmation that the rumors about humans were nothing more than superstition. The Zoren commanders didn't even consider it worth sending a full fleet, but as the scout ship entered Earth's atmosphere, the crew quickly realized something was amiss. The air was different, the land eerily silent, and then they saw them. A group of humans armed with nothing but tools and sheer determination had surrounded the landing site. The Zoren soldiers, expecting no resistance, raised their weapons. But they were unprepared for what came next. The humans moved with surprising speed, their attacks coordinated, their strategies clever. Using the terrain to their advantage, they launched a series of ambushes, exploiting weaknesses the Zoren had never considered. The battle was swift and brutal, and by the time the surviving Zoren scrambled to retreat, they had lost a significant portion of their team. As the battered scout ship took off, the humans watched them go, knowing they had defended their home, but unaware of the storm they had just unleashed. The Zoren Empire had learned a painful truth that day: humans were not as weak as they had believed. But this was only the beginning. The void of space was silent, but for the first time in history the Zoren Empire felt the weight of that silence pressing down upon them. It was the kind of silence that preceded disaster, the eerie quiet before a predator struck. The mighty empire had never known fear. Until now it had started as a minor inconvenience, a simple scout mission to an unremarkable planet called Earth. The crew had landed expecting nothing, just another world full of weak creatures living in ignorance of the galaxy's greater powers. But when that ship returned battered, missing half its crew, and carrying whispers of something unnatural, the first seeds of doubt were sown. At first the Zoren dismissed it. The empire was vast, unchallenged, and indomitable. No primitive race could stand against them. Yet soon warships patrolling the nearby sectors started vanishing, not in battle, not in distress, but in utter silence. There were no distress calls, no wreckage left behind, just ships that ceased to exist as if swallowed by the abyss. The High Command reacted as any supreme power would, with denial, technical failures, piracy, rogue elements. There had to be a rational explanation. The Zoren, after all, did not lose ships they conquered, they destroyed, but they were never hunted. Yet as weeks passed and the disappearances mounted, confidence turned into irritation, then into concern, then into something far more dangerous. Uncertainty, a sense of unease settled over the Empire's ruling council, a discomfort they had never known before. The Empire's military forces had wiped out entire species, reduced thriving civilizations to dust, and crushed rebellions before they had even begun. How could a single backwater planet with no presence in the galactic order challenge them? How could they strike without being seen, and why did they leave no trace? The answer would come, but not in the way the Zoren had hoped. In response to the growing mystery, the Empire dispatched a battle fleet led by the infamous Captain JX. He was a name feared across countless systems, a warlord in all but title, a commander who had never tasted defeat. To him, the disappearances were not a threat, but an insult, a mere inconvenience that needed correcting. His fleet consisted of 25 warships, each capable of reducing entire continents to rubble. No primitive world, no uncontacted species could stand against such force. As they approached Earth's solar system, their scans revealed nothing unusual, no fleets, no defenses, just a single blue world circling an average star. But the moment they crossed the system's threshold, the silence returned, heavy, suffocating, unnatural. Then the first ship vanished. One moment it was there, moving in perfect formation, the next it was gone. No explosion, no energy readings, no distress signals, just gone. Captain JX ordered an immediate scan. Weapons primed, formations tightened. The second ship disappeared, and then the third. Panic was not an emotion, the Zoren knew, but in that moment they felt something close to it. The enemy was not engaging them in open combat, nor were they relying on overwhelming firepower. No, this was something else, something intelligent, something precise, something terrifying. Then the trap was sprung. From the darkness of space they came, not in massive warships, not in grand fleets, but in small, swift vessels moving with a coordination that defied everything the Zoren understood about warfare. They attacked with brutal efficiency, disabling engines, jamming communications, striking where it hurt the most. The Zoren retaliated, their weapons lighting up the void, but they were striking at ghosts. Every time they locked onto a target, it was gone. Every time they adapted their tactics, the enemy was already 2 steps ahead. It was as if they knew how the Zoren thought, how they fought, how they would react. In mere minutes, the disciplined battle formation dissolved into chaos. Ships collided, captains screamed orders into dead calms, and for the first time in the Empire's history, they realized they were not the hunters in this battle. Captain JX's pride shattered, made the call. Retreat, but retreat was not an option. The humans, or whatever they had become, had planned for this. They had spent years watching, studying, preparing. The moment the Zoren tried to flee, the real slaughter began. Ships were torn apart, escape pods were intercepted, and the battle that had started as a show of force became a desperate struggle for survival. By the time JX's command ship managed to break free and jump to hyperspace, half his fleet had been erased from existence. The remaining ships limped back to the Empire, carrying not just the wounded but something far more devastating, a message. The transmission was brief, clear, and spoken in a language that should have been impossible for the humans to know. It repeated once, and then silence. "You should have left us alone." The Empire's ruling council listened in stunned silence. The Zoren, who had never feared anything, now faced an enemy they didn't understand, one they had underestimated, one that had just humiliated them in a way no species had ever dared. And the worst part, they didn't even know if this was humanity's true strength, or if this was just the beginning. The galaxy, once ruled by order and dominance, was about to change forever, and for the first time in its long and brutal history, the Zoren Empire knew fear. The Zoren Empire had always believed itself untouchable, a force beyond reckoning, a dominion of absolute power that shaped the destiny of the galaxy. But as the embers of their disastrous battle over Earth still smoldered in the depths of space, a realization settled over their leaders like a choking fog. Humanity was not just another primitive species waiting to be conquered. They were something else, something unknown, something terrifying. The silence that followed their retreat from the solar system was not just the absence of war. It was the sound of an empire doubting itself for the first time in centuries, and that doubt, that unfamiliar tremor in the once unshakable foundation of their rule, sent ripples through every corner of the galaxy. The whispers that had once been dismissed as foolish myths now carried an undeniable truth. Humanity was a force they had never accounted for. As the battered remnants of the Zoren fleet limped back into Imperial space, carrying the shame of their defeat, the Supreme War Council convened in the heart of Zoren Prime. The high warlords, admirals, and strategists gathered in the Grand War Chamber, their expressions carved from stone, but their minds turbulent. The holographic display of the solar system hovered above them, the image of Earth glowing like a beacon of defiance. Captain JX, the fleet commander who had led their failed assault, stood before them, his voice measured but strained as he recounted the battle. He told them of the human ambush, Tactics, their unnatural ability to adapt mid-combat, their use of the very environment to dismantle a superior force. Every word he spoke was another weight on the Council's shoulders. They had always believed war was a matter of overwhelming firepower and superior technology, yet they had been bested by creatures who by all logic should not have stood a chance. The Council demanded an explanation. How had an insignificant species, one that had never even ventured beyond their own world, managed to cripple the greatest fleet in the galaxy? Reports were analyzed, battle footage dissected, and yet no concrete answer could be found. It wasn't their weapons. Their technology was still leagues behind the Zoren. It wasn't their numbers. The humans had fewer ships, fewer soldiers, and yet they had won. The unease thickened as the Council attempted to rationalize their failure. Some suggested it had been an anomaly, an isolated event, an unfortunate miscalculation. Others, however, weren't so sure. There was something deeply unsettling about the way the humans fought. Not with desperation, but with calculated aggression, as though they had already anticipated the battle's course before it had even begun. The supreme warlord, an elder Zoren named Varix, watched the discussion with cold calculation. He had seen countless conquests, had witnessed the fall of civilizations that had dared to stand against the Empire, and yet this moment felt different. This wasn't mere rebellion, this was something else, something far more dangerous. We underestimated them, Varix finally said, his voice like the grinding of steel. And the cost was our pride. But pride could be reclaimed. The Zoren Empire had never suffered defeat. Without retribution, they would return to Earth with the full might of their war machine, and this time there would be no mistakes, no underestimations, no survivors. The decision was made. An invasion force, the largest the Empire had deployed in over a century, would be assembled. Humanity would be eradicated before they could pose a real threat. But even as the Council reached this conclusion, something else was happening, something they had not foreseen. The disappearances continued. It had started as a mystery, a troubling anomaly, a few ships here and there vanishing without explanation. At first the Empire had dismissed it as accidents, technical malfunctions, or perhaps even hidden resistance groups striking from the shadows. But then entire fleets began to disappear. Communication with entire outposts ceased, supply lines were severed, patrols sent to investigate never returned. It was as though something in the darkness of space had awoken, something that was systematically dismantling the Zoren's reach without ever revealing itself. Panic began to spread among the outer colonies, fear replacing the once steadfast loyalty to the Empire. Varix ordered a full-scale investigation, dispatching his most elite forces to find the cause of these disappearances. They sent scouts to the last known locations of the lost fleets, but all they found were empty voids where warships should have been. No debris, no distress signals, nothing. It was as if the fleets had been plucked from existence itself. Theories ran wild. Could it be a new enemy, a rival empire, some secret rebellion rising from within? Or, Varix loathed even considering it, could it be them? Could it be the humans? The idea was absurd. They were confined to their single planet. They lacked the infrastructure, the technology, the reach, and yet deep down Varix felt a growing unease that refused to be silenced. What if the humans had found a way? What if they were retaliating in a way no one had anticipated? He needed answers, and he needed them now, and so the Zoren made their next move. They sent an elite strike force, battle-hardened warriors unmatched in combat, aboard one of their most advanced warships. Their mission: infiltrate the Sol system, observe Earth undetected, and bring back intelligence that would explain how a backwater species had become a phantom terror in the dark. It was a suicide mission, but the Zoren did not care. They needed answers, and if humanity was truly behind these disappearances, they would be exterminated before they could spread further. The strike force approached Earth under the cover of darkness, their ships cloaking technology, rendering them all but invisible. As they neared the planet, their instruments flickered, interference crackling through their systems. It was subtle at first, a minor disturbance, but then the readings became erratic: gravity fluctuations, energy distortions. Phenomena that should not have been occurring. The commander of the strike force, a ruthless warrior named Zydrek, ordered a full diagnostic, but before they could make sense of the data, their ship's alarms blared, proximity warnings. Something was approaching, something fast. The Zoren barely had time to react before the first impact shook their vessel out of the darkness. Sleek, unfamiliar ships emerged, moving with impossible speed. They didn't match any known design in the Zoren database. They weren't alien, they weren't from any known empire. And then the unthinkable happened. A transmission cut through their encrypted channels, a single voice speaking in perfect, chilling precision. "You should have left us alone." It was human. Before Zydrek could issue an order, the ship's hull was breached. The Zoren had faced countless enemies before, but never like this, never against an opponent that seemed to predict their every move. The Strike Team fought, but the battle was over before it had truly begun. The last thing Zydrak saw before darkness consumed him was the image of Earth looming in the distance, and the terrifying realization that they had awoken something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The Zoren Empire had thought itself the predator. They had ruled the galaxy without challenge, without question, but now, for the first time in their history, they realized the truth. Humanity was not the prey, they were the storm. The remnants of the once mighty Zoren fleet limped back to their empire, carrying with them the echoes of their crushing defeat at the hands of the humans. Panic and disbelief spread like wildfire through the Zoren High Command. For centuries they had stood unchallenged, their empire expanding across the stars without resistance, yet this insignificant world, this Earth, had shattered their illusions of invincibility. The council chambers, usually a place of calculated strategy and unshakable confidence, were now filled with doubt and fear. High Emperor Malkor stared at the holographic display of the battlefield reports, his claws tightening around the armrests of his throne. The losses were staggering, not just in ships but in morale. The entire structure of their empire was built on the belief that the Zoren were superior, that no species could match their power, and now that foundation had been cracked, they needed answers, and more importantly, they needed vengeance. Far away from the Imperial Palace, the surviving officers from the doomed fleet were interrogated relentlessly. Every recorded detail of the battle was analyzed, every piece of footage scrutinized. How had the humans managed to resist? They had no interstellar fleet, no known military presence outside their own atmosphere, yet they had dismantled the Zoren invasion force with terrifying precision. Reports spoke of electronic disruptions, strategic ambushes, and weapons that, while primitive, were deployed with deadly effectiveness. But the most chilling detail was the way the humans fought. They were relentless, adaptable, and fearless. They didn't break under pressure, they didn't retreat in the face of overwhelming odds. Instead, they pressed forward, turning every disadvantage into an opportunity. The Zoren had never encountered anything like it. The Empire's scientists worked frantically to decipher the mysterious technological interference that had crippled their fleet. No known species possessed such capabilities, and the Zoren had assumed Earth to be a backwater planet with no advanced technology, yet something had rendered their ships vulnerable. Theories ranged from hidden human allies among the stars to ancient alien artifacts buried beneath the Earth's surface, but the possibility that frightened them the most was the simplest one. Humanity had done this on their own, and if that was the case, then the Zoren had severely underestimated them. As the Empire prepared for its next move, whispers of the defeat spread beyond Zoran space. Other empires, long resentful of the Zoran's dominance, took notice. The Galactic Union, a coalition of alien civilizations that had always feared open war with the Zoran, suddenly saw a glimmer of hope. If the humans had managed to wound the Empire, perhaps they weren't as invincible as they seemed. Quiet meetings were held in the shadows, alliances considered, and plans discussed. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and many were eager to take advantage of it. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity was anything but complacent. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The world's governments, once divided by politics and borders, now stood united by a common threat. Scientists, engineers, and military leaders worked tirelessly to understand the technology left behind by the fallen Zoran ships. What they found changed everything. Despite their supposed superiority, the Zoran had weaknesses. Their reliance on centralized control systems made them vulnerable to disruption. Their tactics, while effective against lesser foes, were rigid and predictable, and most importantly, their belief in their own superiority blinded them to the ingenuity of their enemies. Humanity had fought wars for centuries, adapting to every form of conflict imaginable. Now they had the opportunity to turn the Zoran's own strengths against them. Deep beneath the surface of the planet, in hidden research facilities, human scientists reverse-engineered captured Zoran technology. Weapons were modified, defenses reinforced, and experimental projects fast-tracked. Earth had entered a new era of technological advancement, one fueled by the urgency of survival. But the most critical discovery wasn't a weapon or a piece of alien machinery, it was an intercepted transmission. A single chilling message from the Zoran High Command: Earth will burn. The second invasion would not be a reconnaissance mission this time. The Zoran were coming in full force. Humanity had wounded their pride, and the Empire would stop at nothing to make an example of them. Even now, thousands of warships were being assembled, entire fleets mobilized for the largest military campaign in the Zoran Empire's history. This was no longer about conquest, it was about annihilation. They would erase Earth from existence, a warning to any other species that dared to defy them. But humanity had no intention of waiting for the storm to arrive. The greatest minds on the planet devised a plan, one that had never been attempted before. If they were to survive, they could not simply defend Earth, they had to take the fight to the stars. A counterstrike was prepared, one that would hit the Zoren before they even had the chance to launch their invasion. It was a desperate gamble, a mission that seemed impossible, but for humanity impossibility had never been a barrier, it was simply another challenge to overcome. The war had begun, and the galaxy was about to witness a battle unlike anything it had ever seen. The Zoren Empire, humiliated and enraged by their unexpected defeat at the hands of humanity, refused to accept the possibility that they had been bested by a species they had once dismissed as insignificant. The loss of an entire fleet was unprecedented, and whispers of the disaster spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Other empires and factions, long accustomed to fearing the Zorans, might begin to question the Empire's dominance. The Zoren High Council, desperate to regain control of the narrative, assembled their most ruthless strategists and warlords to plot their next move. They would not make the same mistake twice. The humans had proven themselves more resourceful than anticipated, but the Zoren were determined to remind the galaxy why they were feared. With this resolve, the Zoren prepared for a full-scale invasion, one that would not simply subdue humanity, but erase them from existence. However, what they didn't realize was that humanity had been watching, learning, and preparing in their own way. On Earth, the first victory against the Zoren had given humanity a new sense of unity and purpose. For the first time in history, nations across the world set aside their differences, pooling their resources, technology, and knowledge to prepare for the inevitable return of their alien adversaries. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, reverse engineering salvaged Zoren technology to enhance Earth's defenses. Military leaders, once confined to conflicts between their own people, now trained together under the banner of a single cause, survival. Humanity had always thrived under pressure, and now, with the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe, they had a reason to evolve faster than ever before. While the Zoren gathered their forces in distant star systems, humanity was quietly but efficiently transforming itself into something far deadlier than the Empire could have ever imagined. The invasion force that the Zoren assembled was unlike anything they had ever deployed before. It was not merely a fleet, it was an armada, tens of thousands of warships, each equipped with the most advanced weaponry the Zoren had ever devised, stood ready to descend upon Earth. Their goal was absolute annihilation. The Zoren had no interest in negotiation or conquest this time. They sought only to eradicate the humans and erase the embarrassment of their previous failure. The sheer scale of their invasion force was designed to overwhelm any possible resistance before it could begin. It was an operation meant to crush humanity before they could pose a real threat. However, what the Zoren failed to realize was that they had already given humanity exactly what it needed: time. As the Armada approached Earth, the humans executed the first phase of their defense plan. Knowing they could not match the Zoren in sheer numbers, they instead relied on strategy, deception, and their newfound knowledge of Zoren technology. A massive electromagnetic pulse generated from Earth's surface disrupted the Zoren's long-range communications and navigation systems. The invasion fleet found itself momentarily blinded, their sophisticated targeting systems rendered useless before they could recover. Hidden missile silos on Earth unleashed a devastating barrage targeting key capital ships and command centers within the fleet. Chaos erupted in the Zoren ranks as their tightly controlled formation broke apart, each vessel struggling to regain control amid the electronic warfare that humanity had masterfully employed. But Earth's defenses did not stop there. In low orbit, repurposed satellites and space stations, now armed with advanced railgun technology, rained destruction upon the disoriented Zoren forces. Human pilots operating newly developed fighter crafts built from a fusion of human ingenuity and alien engineering engaged in fierce dogfights against Zoren warships. What was once expected to be an easy extermination had become a nightmare for the Zoren. They had underestimated humanity's adaptability, and now they were paying the price. The battle raged on, and though the Zoren still possessed overwhelming numbers, they found themselves unable to break through Earth's formidable defenses without sustaining unacceptable losses. Back on the Zoren homeworld, the High Council watched in horror as their grand invasion descended into chaos. The Empire, once unquestioned in its supremacy, was now faced with an enemy that refused to submit. Humanity had done more than just survive, they had fought back with a ferocity that no species had ever dared to display against the Zoren. Panic spread among the Empire's leadership. If they could not crush humanity now, what would stop the humans from turning their gaze outward? What if instead Of merely defending their home, humanity decided to strike back. The fear that had once belonged solely to those who opposed the Zoren was now beginning to seep into the minds of the Zoren themselves. As the battle above Earth continued, a single human vessel smaller than any warship yet more significant than any dreadnought slipped past the chaos unnoticed. It carried a message, a warning to the leaders of the galaxy's other major civilizations. The Zoren had ruled through fear for centuries, but now there was something greater than fear rising in the galaxy. Humanity was not just another species to be conquered. They were something new, something different. The message was clear: the age of Zoren dominance was over and the era of humanity was just beginning. The Zoren Empire, once the undisputed ruler of the galaxy, now found itself trapped in a nightmare it never saw coming. The humiliation of their last defeat at the hands of the humans still lingered in their minds, a wound that refused to heal. Their fleets, once feared across the stars, had been crippled, and their commanders had begun to question the very foundation of their military dominance. The whispers had turned into full-blown fears, and now the Zoren leadership was desperate. They needed to retaliate, to strike back with overwhelming force and crush humanity before the infection of resistance spread any further. The Zoren High Council gathered in a war chamber, their faces grim, their voices sharp with tension. The Supreme Chancellor pounded his fist on the table, demanding answers. How had a species so primitive, so insignificant, managed to turn the tide against them? How had they lost so many ships to creatures that had only just begun to explore the stars? The Zoren intelligence officers scrambled for explanations, but no answer satisfied the burning anger in the Chancellor's eyes. The answer was simple, yet terrifying. Humanity was something the galaxy had never encountered before, and the longer they remained unchecked, the greater the threat they would become. Realizing that conventional military strategies had failed, the Zoren decided to change tactics. Instead of launching another full-scale invasion, which had already cost them dearly, they would employ a far more insidious approach: biological warfare. A group of elite Zoren scientists was tasked with developing a pathogen, one specifically engineered to target human physiology. The plan was brutal yet effective: deploy the virus in Earth's atmosphere and let time do the killing. It would spread undetected, wiping out the human population before they even realized what was happening. With this new weapon in hand, the Zoren dispatched a specialized stealth fleet, small enough to avoid detection but armed with the deadliest biological agent the Empire had ever created. They would deliver death silently, unseen, and finally rid the galaxy of the human scourge. As the fleet approached Earth, the Zoren command watched with anticipation, confident that this time, humanity had no chance of survival. But as always, the humans had other plans. Back on Earth, humanity had not been idle. The previous battles had forced them to adapt at an unprecedented rate. Engineers, scientists, and military strategists worked tirelessly to develop new defenses, new weapons, and most importantly, new intelligence-gathering methods. Through captured Zoren technology, they had deciphered parts of the enemy's communication systems and intercepted a transmission that hinted at the biological threat heading their way. The revelation was chilling. The Zoren weren't coming with warships this time. They were coming with something far worse, something invisible and unstoppable. Humanity had fought off their war machines, but how could they fight something they couldn't see? The world's best minds gathered, desperate to find a solution before it was too late. And then, a breakthrough. A counteragent, a biological failsafe hidden within Earth's own microbial life. Through rapid experimentation and risky field tests, scientists discovered that Earth's unique microbial ecosystem could neutralize the Zoren virus before it even took effect. It was a gamble, but it was their only hope. As the Zoren stealth fleet entered Earth's orbit, they deployed the virus, releasing it into the upper atmosphere. The biological agent spread quickly, invisible and undetectable. But something happened that the Zoren did not anticipate. Within hours of its release, the virus began to degrade, its structure breaking apart as it interacted with Earth's microbial life. The very planet the Zoren sought to destroy was fighting back. As the virus failed, human forces detected the presence of the stealth fleet and launched an immediate counteroffensive. Using new sensor technology developed from Zoren remnants, They pinpointed the enemy's ships and struck with precision, annihilating the fleet before it could retreat. The Zoren had failed once again, and this time, they had no idea how or why. When word of the failed attack reached the Zoren High Council, panic ensued. The humans had survived again. Not only had they evaded destruction, but they had also somehow neutralized the Empire's most advanced biological weapon. The implications were terrifying. If humanity could overcome even this, then they were more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. The Zoren knew now that this was no longer a war of conquest, it was a war for survival. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and the price for that mistake was growing steeper with each passing day. And as fear spread across the Empire, one undeniable truth became clear: the humans were not just surviving. They were winning. The galaxy trembled as the echoes of war spread like wildfire. The Zoren Empire, once confident in its unchallenged dominance, now reeled from the devastation brought upon them by humanity. It was no longer a question of whether humans were a threat. The entire galaxy knew the answer. The real question now was, what would they do next? The shattered remains of the Zoren fleets floated like silent tombs in the void, reminders of a mistake they would never recover from. But even in their defeat, the Zoren still had one last move to make, one final gamble that could either turn the tide or doom them entirely. They needed an answer, and to find it, they sought the aid of something even they feared. In the depths of the galaxy, in a forsaken sector abandoned even by the most daring explorers, an ancient power slumbered. The Zoren, desperate and humiliated, made contact with a force long thought to be a myth, the Harakanayar, an enigmatic race that thrived on the suffering of others. Their existence had been whispered in the shadows, a name used to frighten disobedient soldiers and unruly children. But the Zoren now knew they had no choice. The Harakanayar were the only ones ruthless enough, cunning enough, to counter the unstoppable force humanity had become. The price of their aid would be steep, but the Zoren had no more pride to lose. They only sought vengeance. Meanwhile, humanity had not been idle. The battles against the Zoren had forced them to evolve at an unprecedented rate. Their technology, once primitive, had now surpassed even the most advanced empires. They had studied the wreckage of fallen warships, reverse-engineered weapons, and developed new strategies that played to their strengths. But more than anything, humanity had done what it did best: they adapted. Now, they were no longer merely fighting to survive. They were preparing for something far greater. They were preparing to conquer. The first sign of the Harakanayar came in the form of silence. Communications between distant outposts were cut off. Entire colonies disappeared without a trace. The few messages that did get through spoke of horrors beyond comprehension, ships torn apart as if by invisible claws, entire crews screaming in terror before vanishing into nothingness. The galaxy had known war, but this was different. This was annihilation. The Harakanayar did not seek victory in the conventional sense. They fed on destruction, relished in fear, and reveled in chaos. And they were coming for Earth. Humanity, however, was not the same species that had once been overlooked by the galactic powers. They had learned from every battle, every loss, every mistake. When the Harakanayar finally made their move, expecting to face the same frightened, disorganized prey they had always toyed with, they found something else entirely. They found a species that did not fear them. They found a species that fought not just with weapons, but with an indomitable will that no empire, no predator, had ever encountered before. The first major clash took place in the ruins of a once thriving colony, where the Harakanayar descended in their twisted, living ships. The humans did not retreat. They did not hide. They stood their ground, unleashing weapons of terrifying ingenuity. They had anticipated the attack, setting traps that turned the Harakanayar's own hunger against them. The battle was unlike any before, more than just a clash of technology. It was a war of ideologies. The Harakanayar had always believed fear was the ultimate weapon. Humanity had learned that defiance was stronger. As the battle raged on, humanity unveiled a weapon the Harakanayar had never expected. It was not a superweapon, not a devastating bomb, not a fleet of unstoppable ships. It was something far more terrifying. It was unity. For the first time in history, humans were not fighting against each other. They had united under a single cause, a singular purpose. They had become something greater than just a species fighting for survival. They had become a force that could not be stopped. The Hyrcanear, beings that had terrorized the galaxy for untold millennia, felt something they had never known before. They felt fear. The tide of battle shifted. The humans pressed forward, not just pushing back the Hyrcanear but hunting them down. For every colony the Hyrcanear sought to destroy, they found themselves ambushed, outmaneuvered, and ultimately slaughtered. Humanity, once dismissed as nothing more than a forgotten species on a backwater world, was now turning into the greatest nightmare the galaxy had ever seen. The Zoren Empire, watching from the shadows, realized the terrible mistake they had made. By bringing the Hyrcanear into the war, they had not just unleashed destruction upon their enemies. They had created something far worse. They had forged the very monster that would spell their own doom. Humanity was no longer just defending itself. They were learning, growing, and adapting at an exponential rate. And now, they were looking outward. As the war with the Hyrcanear reached its climax, the final battle was waged over the remains of a dying star. The Hyrcanear, cornered and desperate, unleashed their last and most horrifying weapons, weapons that had once wiped entire civilizations from history. But humanity had already predicted their move. They had studied their enemy, understood their tactics, and prepared accordingly. The battle was brutal, but the outcome was inevitable. The Hyrcanear, the predators of the galaxy, the nightmares of 1,000 worlds, were utterly and completely annihilated. In the aftermath, the galaxy was silent. The Zoren Empire, now fully aware of what they had done, had only one option left: surrender or face total extinction. But even surrender was no guarantee of survival. Humanity had changed. They were no longer fighting just to survive. They were fighting to ensure that no one would ever dare threaten them again. The question was no longer if humanity would win. The question was, what would they do with their victory? The galaxy trembled as the remnants of the Zoren Empire clung desperately to their fractured power, their fleets scattered and their forces broken. Humanity, once a mere footnote in the grand story of the cosmos, had risen to become an unstoppable force, defying all odds and rewriting the balance of power among the stars. But the war was not yet over. The Zoren, though wounded, were not extinct, and in the shadows of their defeat they schemed, hoping for one final act of vengeance that would turn the tide. Humanity knew this and prepared, for they had come too far to falter now. On Earth, the remnants of the battle that had shaken the world were still visible, but instead of ruin, there was rebuilding. The humans had learned quickly, salvaging the wreckage of Zoren technology, integrating it with their own ingenuity, and creating something entirely new: hybrid warships, faster and deadlier than anything the Zoren had ever faced before. No longer bound by the limitations of their primitive past, humanity now wielded weapons that could stand against the mightiest armadas. The sky above Earth was no longer empty. It was filled with warships bearing the emblem of a species that had embraced its role as the galaxy's reckoning. Deep within the ruins of the Zoren homeworld, the last of their warlords gathered in a desperate bid for survival. They knew they could not fight humanity head-on any longer, but their hatred burned brighter than their reason. If they could not reclaim their dominance, they would ensure humanity suffered. They devised a plan, one final assault that would not be about conquest, but annihilation. Using their last remaining fleet, they would launch an all-out attack on Earth, a final desperate gambit to destroy the world that had shattered their empire. Every remaining Zoren warship was armed to its maximum capacity, carrying weapons of destruction powerful enough to turn planets into ashes. This would be their last act, a suicide strike to erase their greatest enemy from existence. But humanity was not idle. Their intelligence networks had grown vast, their reach extending across the stars, intercepting whispers of the Zoren's final gambit. They would not wait for the enemy to come to them. They would bring the war to the Zoren one last time. A massive fleet, larger than any that had ever left Earth, was assembled. Every soldier, every pilot, every strategist knew this was the final battle. There would be no retreat, no surrender, only victory or extinction. As the human fleet warped into Zoran space, they found their enemies waiting, a final testament to their defiance. The Zoran warships, though outnumbered and outgunned, did not hesitate. They launched themselves at humanity with the ferocity of a species that had nothing left to lose. The battle that followed was like no other in the history of the galaxy. The void was filled with fire and destruction, ships exploding in brilliant flashes of light, debris scattering like dying embers. But humanity had learned from every encounter, adapted to every threat, and overcome every challenge. Their warships moved with a precision and efficiency that the Zoran could not match. One by one, the last of the Zoran warlords fell, their ships reduced to wreckage drifting in the darkness of space. And then, in the silence that followed the final explosion, it was over. The Zoren Empire was no more. The greatest threat humanity had ever faced had been extinguished. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The species that had once been dismissed as nothing more than primitives had now claimed victory over one of the most powerful empires the stars had ever known. The balance of power had shifted, and humanity stood at the center of it all. But humanity did not seek conquest. Unlike the Zoran, they did not hunger for domination. Instead, they reached out to the other species of the galaxy, offering peace instead of war, unity instead of destruction. The lesson had been learned by all. Underestimating humanity had been the greatest mistake the galaxy had ever made. And now, with the Zoran gone, a new era was about to begin, an era where humanity was no longer a myth, no longer an afterthought, but a force that would shape the destiny of the stars. And as they looked toward the endless expanse of space, they knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning.